I'm Mary Byers, and this is Associations Today. My guest is Jeff Hurt, Executive Vice President, Education and Engagement at Velvet Chainsaw Consulting. Jeff, one of the reasons I reached out to you is in one of your blog posts, you wrote, and I'm going to quote, "Structures do matter because they either serve or hinder your organization's mission." And you also talk about toll booths in associations. What do you mean by that, and how do they keep conferences from being all they can be?
So let's start with structures. I've been thinking a lot about structures for a long time now. And let's do this as an analogy. When you think about cathedrals in Europe, those structures served a purpose back in medieval times. Today, they're nothing but tourist attractions. Those structures really don't help anymore with that particular organization. If you think about in the 1950s and the 1960s, we had big office buildings in downtown environments. And then we had what we call the white flight or the suburban flight. People moved out to the suburbs, and those buildings became decaying buildings, and they just became empty. What's interesting right now here in Dallas, Texas, where I live, we have something happening where people are moving back into downtown, and people are moving into multiple retail type structures where there's retail at the bottom and condos on the second and third and fourth floors. Those structures, some of those older structures, served a purpose for a while, but they didn't evolve with the times. And oftentimes, the structures we have in our association sector serve us for a time period, but they don't evolve. And they get in our way and they become barriers. They have to kind of change. So that's what I mean by structures. Now the toll booths. You know, there's a gentleman by the name of Josh Packard who released some research just in June of this year, 2016. And in it, he talks about how today's societies are tired of institutions that provide pageantry, performance, and production. They're looking for participation. They're looking for their community where they can belong, and instead they find isolation. I call it permission withholding toll booths. You can't do anything without jumping through a whole bunch of permission withholding toll booths, and particularly in conference settings, you have to get this committee and this task force and this board to approve on any great ideas that may come from members.
So, since our listeners here are individuals who work for associations, if they are lucky enough, should I say, to work for an association, or unlucky enough to work for an association that has either purposely or accidentally put up toll booths, what advice would you give to them in terms of how they can continue to evolve their adult education in the year 2016 despite the things that might be holding them back?
You know, what's really interesting is so much of our conferences are about control and controlling people. And we think we can control their minds with learning. We think if we're talking at them, they're learning it, they're getting it. And it's just not true. What really needs to happen is we need to shift to collaboration. We need to shift to idea sharing, where the value is in the ideas. The value is not in the market economy anymore. It's in the mind share. It's people with diverse opinions, diverse backgrounds coming together and sharing ideas to solve problems for our profession or our industry. So it's really about designing conferences that have collaboration. And that means we need to pull back on some of these controlled structures that we offer within our conferences and offer some more free-form, I almost want to say negotiating of mind sharing with one another and talking with one another about how to solve problems and challenges.
Give me an example, if you would, of an association that has successfully overcome some of the limitations that they've had and they've been able to transform their meeting as a result.
So I'm going to give you two. One I'm going to give you is one that's in the process right now, and it's called the Canadian Medical Association, CMA. They've been around 140 years. One of their conferences has been called the Parliamentary of Medicine. Sounds really archaic, right? Well, it was. The people actually walked in robes
Oh
when their
my.
names were called out, and there was this pageantry of people who got to vote on what CMA was going to agree to. Well, that's really outdated. That comes from a certain time period. And they realize that is part of their governance, their structure that has to change. So they're in the process. They've gotten rid of the pageantry. They've gotten rid of that production. And they're in the process of renovating and reinvigorating that meeting and making it different. Another one is CWA, California Water Environment Association. Sounds like a water group, right? An environmental association. It's
It makes sense.
wastewater engineers. It's the people who clean our poop. It's the people from public utilities. And they're a group that actually felt they needed to change things. They needed to do something different because water is a huge issue in California. It's going to be the issue of the future in many organizations and many countries. And they needed to get out of their mindset of the way they've always done things. And their governance was causing a structural problem. So they've entered into a new arena of 21st century learning in their conferences, and their conferences are exploding.
So very, very specifically, from a very practical standpoint, if I were on staff and I could only do three things over the next 6 months to try to turn my organization more into a permission giving rather than a control organization, very practically, actually, let's put it this way, if you were walking into an organization that was a very controlling organization, what would be the first three things that Jeff Hurt would do?
So I like to call it, I would unleash the Trojan mice instead of unleashing the Trojan horse.
Okay?
The Trojan horse is where we try to reinvent everything. The Trojan mice are those little things that you can do without permission that make major changes. So the first thing I would do is I would change the call for proposals. And I would put an emphasis in the call for proposals. We want audience participation and interaction. We're looking for peer-to-peer collaboration. And we're going to give an emphasis. We're going to look for 20 to 30% of our presenters who can do audience interaction and let the audience discuss the tough issues. That would be one that I would go after.
Okay.
A second one that I think I would go after is I would work with presenters and say, I'm looking for some presenters who want to step into 21st century learning. We now know there's enough science that backs up empirical evidence on how the brain really learns. I'm looking for presenters who are willing to work with me. I'll help coach you and work with you and give you some ideas on how to be a better presenter with 21st century learning. That'd be a second thing I do. And the third thing I do is I would change the evaluation process. I would change the evaluation process so it's not about whether or not attendees walked out feeling good, oh yes, I love this speaker, but what did I learn that I can apply on the job? Can I apply 20% of what I learned, 30% of what I heard, 50%? And I would change that process so that we start looking for a different type of speaker.
Excellent advice, Jeff. Thank you so much for your time today. This is Mary Byers with Associations Today, and I'd like to thank my producer, Com Partners. If you're looking for an online learning provider, I suggest you give them a call.